We're here today to sign two important pieces of legislation into law, and the goal of these bills is to stop, combat nefarious foreign influence and corporate espionage in Florida. If you look at what's gone on now with the coronavirus pandemic and the cover-up of the origins of COVID-19, it's pretty clear that this was a virus that almost assuredly leaked out of this lab in Wuhan. This is a lab where these scientists were working very closely with the Communist Party of China as well as the Chinese military. When you had these folks fall ill who were working in that lab last fall, the Communist Party of China decided to cover it up. They didn't give any information out. They didn't ask for any assistance. They didn't give a heads up to anybody. They tried to cover it up. And basically, the world has had to endure over a year and a half of a lot of bad stuff as a result of this. So they covered it up, and they need to be held accountable for this. But I also think if you look at what's happened since then, it's pretty clear that if you go back last year at the beginning of 2020, January, February, there were people scurrying around, and you see this in Fauci's emails, to try to cover up the fact that this may have gone out of a lab. You actually had people saying there's no way it could have come out of the lab, when privately they were acknowledging it very well likely did come out of the lab. And so I think what this has exposed is you do have relationships between a lot of these institutions in China, particularly in the research realm, and bureaucrats in the United States. You have a whole bunch of other institutions. And so our bills today focus on foreign influence writ large. It absolutely, the 7 countries that are identified specifically, of course, the Communist Party of China, but yes, Communist Cuba, Venezuela, all those, and it's all very important. But I think if you look right now, there is no single entity that exercises a more pervasive, nefarious influence across a wide range of American industries and institutions than the Communist Party of China. Academia in the United States is permeated with influence, and I'll go through some of the people. You have researchers getting indicted. This is very common to see researchers at major institutions, including in Florida and also around the country, getting indicted for being in cahoots with the Chinese government. You look at corporate media and the entertainment industry in this country, they are in the pocket of the Communist Party of China. I mean, if Hollywood comes up with a movie that the CCP doesn't like, that gets censored. They are not going to run afoul of that orthodoxy. You look at corporate media in this country, they were on the vanguard of trying to suppress the truth about the lab leak theory. They've got deep financial ties to the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party, and we just have to call it for what it is. Big tech also runs interference for the Communist Party of China. People were trying to search for the Tank Man in Tiananmen Square on Bing recently, and it had no results came up. That's very curious. Microsoft said, oh, it was just an oversight, it was a mistake or whatever. Really, that's a pretty convenient mistake to have. But you see time and time again, the big tech giants, it seems like when they put their thumb on the scale, they're almost always putting their thumb on the scale in favor of protecting the Communist Party of China. And of course, in the United States, major celebrities, athletes, and business leaders will frequently virtue signal regarding the latest crusade or cause du jour that they have about things in the United States. And yet, almost every one of them falls silent when it comes to calling out the atrocities committed by the Chinese Communist Party. And so all we are doing today is saying enough is enough. We've got to start fighting back. And so the state of Florida is doing that. If you look at the bad influence that we see, we've seen it here in Florida. Just in February, a University of Florida researcher was indicted for taking grant money from UF for his company in China. September 2020, Jacksonville woman pled guilty for trying to illegally export engines to China. February 2020, Illinois court awarded Motorola $764 million in a case after an engineer stole thousands of confidential documents and millions of lines of code to benefit a Chinese company. September 2019, a University of Kansas researcher collected federal grant money while working full-time for a Chinese university. Of course, you see Iran and other countries as well. But I think here, as of now, as of the beginning of this past year, the FBI is investigating 1,000 cases of theft of U.S. technology. And this is almost always theft that's designed to serve the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. So we don't have to look long and far to see examples of this. I don't think they get the attention they deserve, and clearly a lot of folks in Washington need to do more to be able to combat it. But in Florida, we're going to take a stand. And so we are taking a stand, and these bills I'm signing into law today, foreign adversaries will not have access to our schools, government, and companies like they have in the past. Not the Communist Party of China, not Russia, not Cuba, not North Korea, not Iran, not Syria, not Venezuela. In fact, the first bill that I signed today safeguards our public institutions from undue foreign influence, and that means prohibiting agreements between public entities and the Communist Party of China or Cuba or any of these other malignant forces. And so as of the time we sign this bill and it goes into effect, Florida, we will be banning things like Confucius institutions from being in our universities or in our colleges. And I know we had issues with that right here in Miami-Dade County, so it's the right thing to do. But beyond prohibiting direct deals with these adversarial governments, the bill also makes sure we don't make deals with private companies that are closely tied to these foreign adversaries. And the bill also makes sure all nation states, corporations, organizations, and individuals seeking to engage with colleges and universities are fully vetted. We don't want bad actors involved in our colleges and university, and we'll hold you accountable if you run afoul of these new laws. We're also going to sign the Combating Corporate Espionage in Florida Act. It creates new criminal offenses in Florida for the theft and trafficking of trade secrets. Anyone who willfully and without authorization steals or attempts to steal a trade secret and use it for their own benefit will now face a third-degree felony, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. If the same person tries to sell the stolen trade secret, they'll face a second-degree felony with even more penalties. And finally, if an individual entity violates this law on behalf of a foreign government, the penalties are significantly enhanced, adding even more time in prison. So I want to thank Speaker Sprowls. I want to thank the representatives and senators here for their attention to this. We knew that we needed to stand up. We knew that we needed to start taking a stand against this because it's really gotten out of hand. And I really hope that we're going to have accountability for the origins of the COVID pandemic, because this did not need to happen. And yes, the Chinese Communist Party is primarily to blame, but there's also American money that very well may have flowed into Wuhan. There were U.S. bureaucrats who were involved at a minimum of trying to divert attention away from the true origins. And so all of those folks need to be held accountable. And I do think China, what we're doing here as a state level is important, it's significant, but there's much more that needs to be done to be able to combat CCP influence within the United States.